Okay, we were talking about Armen Gilliam in the previous video, and we were talking about how Gilliam, the surname Gilliam, is derived from the word Guillaume, the Norman French Norman name Guillaume, which in turn comes from Wilhelm in German, which is a combination of the words will and helmet. And the interesting thing about that, there's a prophetic significance to that. And for that, we will go very quickly to 1 Thessalonians 5. We won't stay on this too long because otherwise we would just go on forever for a long time. So we'll just read here in 1 Thessalonians 5. This is the passage that comes after the passage on the rapture, the famous passage that people have misinterpreted for a long time. But then Paul starts talking about the coming of the Lord, that he will come as a thief in the night, and that we as children of light will be prepared for that. Those who are awake, but those who are sleeping and drunk will not be prepared for that manifestation, and that coming will take them by surprise. And as we continue in the rapture videos, we will begin to hopefully, God willing, begin to share on what it means to be surprised by the coming of the Lord and why he comes as a thief, which is such a negative term, especially a holy God applying that analogy to himself, coming as a thief in the night. And we will see in the rapture videos, God willing, what that all represents and what it means to be surprised by the coming of the Lord. So the thing is, in verse 7 it says, "For those who sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we might live with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing." But what we wanted to point out is that Paul decides to mention two elements of the armor of God. As you may know, as you may recall, in Ephesians 6, Paul kind of lists the 6 components of the armor of God. You have the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the sword of the word, the girdle of truth, the shield of faith, and the shoes of the gospel of peace. So you have these 6 elements, but Paul, for some reason, just focuses on 2 here. Why doesn't he mention the other 4? And there's a prophetic reason for that. So if you think about it, if you have, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at drawing. I wasn't born to be an artist. Maybe some sort of kind of Picasso type artist, maybe, where you can be terrible at drawing and still be considered an artist. But the thing is that you have the helmet. So let's I pray that you will use your imagination here. This looks more like a Civil War hat, but that's the helmet, and the breastplate of righteousness would come here, and you have the sword of the word, which would be out here, and you'd have the girdle of truth, which would be down here around the waist, and you would also have the sandals of peace, of the gospel of peace, which would be down here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're missing one, which would be, let's see, we have the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, the sword of the word, the girdle of truth. Oh, I'm sorry, the shield of faith, which would go on the other hand, would be right here. So those are the 6 elements of the armor of God. But Paul, for some reason, just points out this component and this component. The breastplate and the helmet. And so that means that he forgets the components that go on the arms, so those are gone, and he forgets the components that go from the waist down. So that there goes the girdle of truth and the sandals of peace. So all you're left with are the breastplate and the helmet. And as I was sharing with someone a long time ago or some time ago, if you think about it, this just leaves you like like the stump. It's like a person who has lost his extremities, both arms and both legs, and is left like just like the trunk, the stump right here. That's all that's left. And the reason why Paul only mentions those two components is because that's practically the way you're left when you have gone through fourth seal death and you are in fifth seal hibernation. When you're dead, you're dead. You can't move around. You can't use your feet. You can't use your arms. You have been left powerless. You've been killed. You're totally dead. And all that is left of you is this little stump. And out of that stump has to come the whole tree again eventually. But you're left powerless. So whilst you're in fifth seal hibernation, the only two elements, major elements, you could say, I mean, we're talking in a figurative sense. I pray that you will understand this in the spiritual sense. That in the fifth seal, you're basically the only two elements left active in you in the armor of God are the breastplate of righteousness and the helmet of salvation. And here Paul decides to call this the breastplate of faith and love. He calls it the breastplate of righteousness in Ephesians, but he calls it the breastplate of faith and love. So faith and love get concentrated on the breastplate, and the helmet he calls the helmet of the hope of salvation. So you have faith, hope, and love. Faith and love in the breastplate, and hope in the helmet. And that has a lot of significance, but in short, the hope part of the helmet speaks of somebody who is trapped in this state of hibernation, powerless, with no arms, no legs, spiritually speaking, and he or she is still hoping for the redemption of God in the midst of that. And the breastplate is to cover his heart. And now the question would be, what does this have to do with Wilhelm? Well, we said helm has to do with, helm means helmet, so that goes with this part, and will means will, literally, just like in English. And as we've shared on the website time and again, the part of the soul where you have your will is the heart. That's where you make your decisions. That's the center of the human will is the heart. So and the breastplate is the part of the armor that protects the heart, the major organs in your body, so it speaks of a component that protects your will, that prevents you going astray from God's will in the midst of that difficult circumstance. It preserves your major organs, it keeps them alive, but you can't move, and since you've been cut off, from waist down as well, you can't reproduce yourself. You're left in this utter state of impotence, and I mean impotence in the sense of not being capable of doing anything. You're impotent in that situation, so Gilliam speaks of the fifth seal, people who are willing to go through the fifth seal. So that's what Armen Gilliam represents. And as we said, Armen Gilliam died at age 47. Lorenzo Charles, who died a few days earlier, died at age 47. His coach, Valvano, died in 1993, I think it was, at age 47 as well. So there is a pattern being formed here. And the thing is, when people started talking about Lorenzo Charles passing away, everybody kept mentioning Valvano. Valvano would always somehow enter the conversation when you started talking about Lorenzo Charles, because the two go together in the hearts of most college sport athletes in America who remember those times. So God allowed these three people who died at the same age to surface, all within a period of several days. Now, those are the first three people that we wanted to talk about. And I pray that in all these supposedly random things that that the Lord has had me sharing, that you see the message that is being formed, the pattern that's being shown by God in the midst of the deaths of these three persons, which seems so random, so meaningless, right? You would say, well, why would God take the life of Lorenzo Charles? Why would Armen Gilliam die so young? He was fine, fit, he was a very healthy man. He wouldn't drink, he wouldn't smoke. I mean, he was a very, he seemed to be leading a very productive and healthy life. So why would he die so young? Well, as we are sharing right now, there's a prophetic reason why these remarkable people died at such a young age. And one thing that I wanted to mention is that when I saw the name Guillaume, as I was looking up information on Gilliam, the first thing that came to my mind is a person called Robert Guillaume. I don't know if many of you might or might not be old enough to remember Robert Guillaume and Benson, a TV series that ran in the late 70s and early 80s on American television, and it had to do with this man called Benson, who worked at the governor's mansion. I think he was like the butler or something at first, and then he started moving up. He eventually became the lieutenant governor and all that. But it was a pretty funny show. I really, if you ask me to recount one of the plots of one of the episodes, I wouldn't be able to remember a single one. But I do remember that a long time ago, like in the early 80s, I was kind of fascinated by that show for some reason, especially the reruns that would air on local television in Baltimore, and on Channel 13, I think it was. But the thing is that the reason why I'm mentioning this is because in 1985, 2 years after the 1983 thing, I was still living in Baltimore, and I was attending another university, which I shall not mention for now, but that university's name has to do with Spain somehow. So Spain is kind of a theme running through all of these persons somehow also. But the thing is that in the midst of that, something happened. I'm not going to share the details with you because I don't think it would be productive, spiritually speaking, for you to know the details. It wouldn't be healthy. Maybe the enemy would use it for the wrong reasons. But there was an incident, not something that happened outside. I mean, if you had had like a camera on me all day, every day during that time period, I don't think you would have noticed what happened, because what happened was something internal inside of me. It's like I don't know if it was Satan or I don't know who to attribute it to, but in a sense, a thought came into my heart, into my mind and my heart, and that thought just turned my world upside down, and it just haunted me, and it just made my life a total darkness. It was a pretty dark period. It was maybe a month or so that I was under that heavy cloud of darkness because of that thought that came into my heart and mind. And I had no way of overcoming it. I was going through this very dark period. And I remember that as I was having this internal struggle within me, for some reason, God drew my attention to that Benson show even more. And every time, I think it was at around 5 p.m., it was around the summertime, it was the summertime of 1985, they had the show at that hour, and I would turn on the show, and it was like the only friend I had, the only outlet that my soul had to kind of come out of that darkness for a little while. So it was like my friend. That show became a way that something that God used to keep me alive during that harsh period of time, that dark period. And so it's kind of interesting to me that that surfaced. You know, when I saw that name, it kind of brought back the memory of all that I went through in that 1 month, I think, period of time, and how that show called Benson, starring an actor called Robert Guillaume, was used by God to keep me alive and keep me kind of wishing for a brighter day, or believing that a brighter day would come in the midst of that internal darkness that I was going through. So I don't know exactly how it fits with everything else, but I do know it's related somehow. Now, that's person number 3. We've talked about Lorenzo Charles. We've talked about Jim Valvano. We've talked about Armen Gilliam. All of these have been basketball related up until now. And now we're going to talk about 2 people that would apparently have nothing to do with the other 3. But as I was sharing with you in the first video in this short series, is that the emotions that that would come over me as I thought about Lorenzo Charles passing and Jim Valvano's passing and Armen Gilliam's passing, the emotions, the joy and the sad, the joy, because not at their death, but at what they did, like, you know, the joy I experienced in the 1983 victory by NC State. That type of the positive and the negative emotions that would surface as I thought about these people had the same texture as the emotions I began to perceive as I thought about these persons. That God, for some reason, just put them in my heart and mind around the same time, and I could see that there was a certain connection, a spiritual connection between these people and the 3 people above. Now. To kind of give a backdrop to why Bobby Jindal has been in my heart and mind, it's worth going back to 2008. I remember that, as we share on the website, those of you who might have been reading the postings around that time, we had certain doubts as to who the right candidate was from the Republican Party in the American race for the White House in 2008. I was praying to God around that time and asking him, God, who is the one you want? And not only from the Republican, but also from the Democrat side, because, you know, God has no party, so who knows? I mean, you can never say, okay, the right candidate can never come out of the Democrat Party, even though that is kind of unlikely. You know, that's like having the next slam dunk champion coming out of the, you know, some pygmy tribe or something like that. It's very unlikely, but, you know, it can happen. As I was looking at the candidates, you know, from both parties, I kept asking God, which is the candidate you want? And none of them looked pretty good. I mean, it was an awful field. I mean, 2008 was in the middle of the 4-year revival delay that America was going through, and it was a bad period. So it was a kind of a bad crop that year. And as you may recall, we began to see certain things about Mr. B.O. You know who we are talking about, Mr. Barack Obama. Certain things that have become manifested as he eventually won the White House, and now he is destroying the country. The negative aspects were plainly visible in him, even from 2008, when we began to share about those negative aspects on the website. The spirit of deceit that just envelops that man. And that's why the White House has become the flies house, infested with flies, literally and spiritually. And that's why this fly was running around, the one that we killed an hour or 2 ago. So the thing is that as we were thinking about the candidates, the way I like to say it is the least worst of all the candidates would seem to be John McCain. And when the time came for him to elect a vice presidential candidate, I kept thinking of Bobby Jindal, and I just felt in my spirit, as I would pray about this or ask God about this, that was the person God wanted as John McCain's running mate. And I felt tempted on several occasions to mention that as in the postings around that time, but for some reason, just God didn't allow me to say that. So I kept it to myself, and I don't think I have shared it with many people up until now, at least people who visit the website. So this is the first time that the Lord has allowed me to share this with those of you who visit the website on a regular basis. So that was the sense that I had, that Bobby Jindal, who is a political figure from Louisiana, was the person that God wanted John McCain to pick as his vice presidential running mate. And I remember that around that time, I don't know if you remember, but you had the Republican National Convention that was being held in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, which correlates coincidentally with the next person we'll be talking about. And while the RNC, the Republican National Committee, was having their convention there, there was a hurricane that was headed towards Louisiana again, Hurricane Gustav. And Bobby Jindal had become the governor of Louisiana. I remember him even from before. I would see him as a commentator, as an analyst on Fox News. And I didn't know who he was. I just saw this, dark-skinned fellow who would just show up out of nowhere and start saying stuff. But when I would listen to him, I felt this man has wisdom. There was something very special about this man. And there was something appealing. There was an intelligence, a thoughtfulness, a wisdom about him, and an integrity about this human being. And I only knew him as an analyst on a cable station. But he eventually somehow became the governor of Louisiana. And he handled Hurricane Gustav like you would not believe. If you may recall, I think he organized the largest one of the largest evacuations. It was like 2 million people in American history, and it was all orderly. I mean, completely different from the mess that Ray Nagin and all the Democrat idiots did during Hurricane Katrina. And so he showed a tremendous leadership. And I remember that there was something, I can't quite recall, but because of Hurricane Gustav, a lot of people were not able to make it to the Republican National Convention, to the first few days of the convention. So the convention was kind of empty. So there was something like, it was like, in a sense, the hurricane stalled the convention. So you had the hurricane story and the Republican National Convention happening in the news at the same time, and God made sure that the two events were related somehow. And interestingly enough, John McCain eventually decided to have a running mate, and he announced Sarah Palin, as you all know, on August 29th, 2008. And August 29th, 2008 happens to be the third-year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina hitting Louisiana. And I believe that all of those events, like the way Hurricane Gustav hitting Louisiana was news as the Republican National Convention was taking place in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, and the fact that the vice presidential announcement was made on the date of Hurricane Katrina hitting Louisiana. was God's way of making sure that those who were paying attention in the spirit realized that there was a spiritual connection between the RNC, Republican National Convention, the election of the vice presidential candidate, running mate, and the state of Louisiana. It was as if God was making sure that people understood, I want Bobby Jindal. Now, the thing is that John McCain apparently had conversations with Bobby Jindal and obviously Sarah Palin and some other people, but it is said, Bobby Jindal says, and I believe it, if he says it, I trust, I don't have any reason to question it. He says that John McCain never offered him the vice presidential nomination, and that whenever they did talk around that time, it was about ideas or things like that, but the issue of the vice presidential selection never came up in their conversations. So that means that John McCain didn't understand what God was trying to tell him. And John McCain messed up big time in more than one way. And so in a sense, I was saddened when Sarah Palin was elected, not because of her, but because I knew that it was not, she was not the ideal person at that point in time. And that unfortunately exposed her to a lot of savage treatment. And John McCain was so inept that he didn't defend her properly, and his campaign misused the talents in Sarah Palin. And you have the mess that we have today with the tarnished image that Sarah Palin has because of a blasphemous, and I mean blasphemous in the sense of the original Greek word, which you may find in the body of Moses posting, that the blasphemous mainstream media that has gone after her to try to destroy her. And so, but the thing is that Bobby Jindal figures somehow into this whole thing. Now, what drew my attention as I was looking for information on Bobby Jindal is that, I was surprised when I found this. I didn't know it. That there was this Southern Republican Leadership Conference in 2010. Since when I hear, big terms, names like that for conferences and events, it just turns me off. It's like, it's like too much pomposity when they have to give it such a long and illustrious name. So maybe that's why I didn't know about this. But during the Southern Republican Leadership Conference in 2010 that was being held in New Orleans, Louisiana, coincidentally, Bobby Jindal announced to the audience, to the surprise of the audience, that he was not seeking the nomination in 2012. And he made that announcement on April 9th, 2010. Now, the reason why that kind of just caught my attention immediately is because, as we've been saying over and over again, the dream of the revival being manifested in this generation died on April 4th, 2010, on a Sunday, the 4th of April, the anniversary of Martin Luther King's death, coincidentally. And less than 1 week later, Bobby Jindal says, I'm not running for president of the United States. Now, let me say this to you. This is a Bible studies website, but we're dealing with things in the spirit realm. And I'll share this in my heart. This is coming from my heart, and you can decide what to do with it, whether you think it's from God or from Satan or the flesh or whatever you may want. But I'll say this to you, that the ideal pair to run at this point in time, they're not perfect. Unfortunately, there's no one out there who comes even close to the full politician that God would have raised up had this generation done what it had to do. But the best combination out there for a president and vice presidential team that would help restore this country from the mess that the bastards, and I'm using the term in the sense of Hebrews 12, that the bastards who are right now in power have done to this country. The two people who would best start the rescue process would be Bobby Jindal as president and Paul Ryan as vice president. That is the winning ticket. But unfortunately, Bobby Jindal seems to be determined not to run. And I believe in my heart that there was something in his spirit that just hit him around that week, and he became convinced that the door had been closed, and that's why he decided not to run for president. He would make a wonderful president, and Paul Ryan would make a wonderful vice president, and then he would eventually make a very good president himself after Bobby Jindal had finished out his 2 terms in office. But unfortunately, it seems like that is going to be left as a pipe dream out there, and maybe it's going to come true someday, but it's going to be when those 2 guys are way older than they are right now. But the important thing that I wanted to share with you is that he seemed to have sensed something that week in his spirit, and his pulling out of the nomination process so publicly around that time is like God saying, I am pulling out of this generation, and this generation is not worthy of people like Bobby Jindal being in the White House. Who knows if he will change his mind later on, but the fact that he became reluctant to run at that point when the revival had been declared dead just a few days earlier has prophetic significance. And the interesting thing also is that the April 9th date, when he announced that he was not running, was the very same date, April 9th, 2010, and you can look it up on the website, when Yahoo News posted a story about 2 eagles falling from the sky. You may read about that event in the posting called Eagle Down, and it has to do with 2 eagles in Alaska, that has to do with Sarah Palin, which has to do with the vice presidency, which has to do with Bobby Jindal, because of what we just said a few moments ago. And so you have these 2 eagles in this mating ritual, which were going down this spiral, this downward spiral, and they apparently got caught up in the moment, or something happened, and they didn't let go of each other in time, and the male eagle landed on the snow and died, and the female eagle landed alongside of him, but didn't die. Apparently they kind of got detached shortly before impact, and for some reason the female eagle was able to survive, and the male eagle died, and all of that we shared, what that represented. And the interesting thing is, when you look up, when you Google, when you do a search of that story on the internet, you will find a headline says America Downward Spiral. So it's kind of a figure of the downward spiral that America went into because of what this American generation decided to do regarding the revival. And so it's interesting that as that night, as Bobby Jindal was saying, I'm not running, that same day Yahoo was posting a story about these 2 eagles that went in this downward spiral in Alaska. And I think that event happened 1 or 2 days before it was posted on Yahoo News. So all of these things were happening around that time, around that early April window in 2010. It was God saying, I will not visit this generation. Also the thing is that if you look up that news story on the internet, it says that the eagles were dancing around Prince William Sound in Alaska. So you again have William, which has to do with Wilhelm, which has to do with Guillaume, which has to do with Gilliam, which has to do with Armen Gilliam, who died at age 47. All these things are just so interrelated. It's kind of unusual. And also the news story, I believe it's the same Yahoo news story, because unfortunately Yahoo kind of takes down their news stories after a while. I don't know why they do that. Apparently they don't have as much space as Google on their hard disks. But the thing is that in the original news story, I believe You will also find the same quote that I found somewhere else a few days ago. It says, I'd like to say that they mate for life, but they mourn for a moment. Paul Matier said, they get over it pretty quick. They were interviewing a person, that had to do with this, with the rescuing of the female eagle and all of that in Alaska. And it's kind of interesting the wording that he used, or I think it was a he. It says, I like to say that they mate for life, but they mourn for a moment. They get over it pretty quick. So he was talking about the female eagle mourning the death of her male partner, but then flying away. And the male partner represents the manifestation of the male spirit anointing in the revival. And the female soul is the weak part of the remnant that is left behind, figuring out what to do with its life now that the revival is dead. And that's what I am going through, and I really don't know how much longer the Lord will have me around, because I look around and I don't see any other reason to stick around, you could say. And so I really don't know how much longer I will have before I'm told to go as well. But so all these things happened around that time, and it's also interesting that on April 9th, 1865, the Civil War between the North and the South ended. That's when the peace agreement was signed at Appomattox or something like that, I think. So that date, April 9th, when the Civil War was supposed to end, that was the same date when the story came out of the Eagles spiraling to their tragic crash, and Bobby Jindal saying, I'm not running. So what was supposed to be a date of victory, when, okay, finally we have peace, ended up, in a sense, like a day of peace, but peace in a negative sense. Because instead of God saying, yes, we have overcome the stubbornness of this generation, and I will manifest myself in them, he said, okay, we are signing the agreement right now. I am not coming to visit you, so the war is over, in a sense, because now the judgments are just beginning. Now, one thing that also drew my attention, I just throw this in as a parenthesis, is that Bobby Jindal's name is Piyush Jindal. He was born to Indian immigrants who came to America from Punjab, India. And if I'm not mistaken, he was born 6 months after his parents arrived in America. So that means that he was conceived in India, but was, born here in America. So it's like this timely birth, that now allows him to be considered as a candidate for the presidency, because had he been born as a son of Indian parents in India, he would not qualify to be president of the United States. But it's interesting to me that he was conceived in India. And his official name is Piyush. But for reasons which don't need to be explained, he adopted the nickname Bobby, because I don't think Piyush Jindal is kind of a very good name for a politician. It doesn't ring the same as Bobby Jindal. So we're all happy that he chose that nickname, even though his official name is Piyush Jindal. And the thing is that the fact that he was conceived in Punjab, India, has a lot of personal significance to me. And I'm going to say something that a lot of people may not, that most people do not know, that I haven't shared with many people. But I just feel it has to go out there somewhere. I have to say it at one point, so that, if something happens to me, at least I can rest in the fact that I did say it before I left. So I leave it as a like when somebody's about to die and they kind of record their last words. So saying the things they want to have said before they're gone. So, in that, I'm saying it in that sense. I don't know why else I would say it, but the thing is that it drew my attention that he was conceived in India, that his parents are from India, because in December of last year, I just began to have this urge from God to take a DNA test. One thing about me that that kind of intrigues me, intrigues myself, is that I am a mixture of a lot of races, humanly speaking. I mean, spiritually, I believe I have a very definite profile of what spiritual race I belong to. But biologically speaking, I am a combination of a lot of races. And when people look at me, they seem to have a hard time figuring out where I am from, and what ethnicity I have. And that's one thing I get asked about. That's what intrigues me personally. That I have been stopped in the street, I mean literally, to be asked, where I am from. It's like people look at me and they try to figure me out, and they have a hard time, figuring me out. Especially people who are not Americans, who are obviously from somewhere else. It's like they're trying to say, "Are you with us?" That's kind of the sense I get sometimes. Are you one of us? And so they start kind of out of nowhere, strangers coming to me and asking me, where you're from. It's like when I came to Pasadena in 2009. It's the first time I had ever been in California. I had always avoided even the thought of living in California, like the plague. I had never wanted to come here. And now I know why. But the thing is that, but I had to come, so, and I was forced by circumstances to come, so I'm here for a season. I don't know how long before I may have to go or whatever. But the thing is that I went to a local laundromat, to do my laundry. And as I was approaching the laundromat, I just got the sensation that I was going to be seen as a stranger in that place. That I was going to be, looked at like an alien, like a guy landing from Mars. And I just kept saying to myself, maybe I'm just being paranoid, and nobody's even going to notice me. I'm just going to walk in, just like anybody else. I mean, there are people from all over the world in the Los Angeles area, so why would they focus on me? So I began to say, I'm just being paranoid, but I just kept getting the sense in my spirit that I was going to be treated like a total stranger, an alien, in that laundromat. So I walked in with my clothes, and as I was walking in, there was this young lady, very young, like 9, 10 maybe, and she was talking to somebody else, and I walked in right in the middle of her conversation with her parent, apparently, her mother, I guess, I'm not sure. But as I walked between the two, walking into the laundromat, she looked up and said to me, "You are different." And she looked like a young Hispanic lady, and she said to me, "You are different." I mean, and it was just so shocking to me, because as I was walking in, I was taking the attitude, I'm being paranoid. I'm just gonna walk in like anybody else, like I've been here before. So I was walking in with this sense of calm. So it's not like I was being all schizophrenic and paranoid and walking in, with making weird gestures. I just walked in like any other person. And the first, it was like this cold bucket of water poured over me. This young lady out of nowhere saying to me, "You are different." And I just smiled at her and walked in, but it was shocking to me. And as I sat down to do my laundry and wait for the clothes, that horrible ritual that you have to go through sometimes, I sat there and I could see people staring at me. with an angry face. And I kept wondering, I mean, do they think I'm a thief or a criminal? What is it about me? And I got these nasty stares from several people. But I share all of this to point out the fact that for some reason, when I'm in a place, I for some reason seem to draw attention and get people wondering where I'm from. And I get asked that question a lot. Where are you from? It's like, where are your parents from? What is your ethnicity? And I don't give them any reason to make them, wonder if I am from Kazakhstan or, or if I'm like from Nigeria or whatever. I mean, there's nothing about me, I would dare say, that would make that question so important to a lot of people. But I do believe it's spiritual. There's something going on there. But the whole reason why I'm sharing all of this is because out of all of that, I began to wonder, I mean, what is my ethnic makeup? So I asked God about it, and God said to me, you have to take a DNA test because I want to say something to you. So I eventually, found a place on the internet, and I did this DNA test. And some of you might already know what my ancestry is from my father's side. I think I have insinuated it on the website enough. It's like I've kind of left a few hints here and there, and those who have been paying attention and have been reading the postings might know what my ancestry is on the right hand side. I mean on my father's side. But I'm not going to say it to you right now. I just want to leave it as a mystery to you. I don't think you would be able to know from looking at me, but my surname has a certain origin, and I don't think most of you would figure it out either from looking at me or from seeing it written out, or even Googling it or anything. I don't think you would know where my father's ancestry is from. So I have a very clear line. On that side, it's kind of very clear what my racial makeup would be from that side. But from my mother's side, it's a much more complicated story. Even though there's a bit of mixture on both sides, but I ended up being the strange combination. And when I got the results, I was just totally shocked because my DNA ended up matching. The results give you the list of cities where your DNA is most likely to appear. Where it would be, the cities or locations in the world where your DNA would most likely be found at. A DNA like yours would be found at. And almost all of the results, the top 20 locations, ended up being places in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, that region, and a little bit into Iran, but mostly around the western side of India, which was totally shocking to me. And the place where I would most likely, where my DNA would be most likely, happens to be Gujarat, India, which is the birthplace of Mahatma Gandhi, which is a person I admired when I was a kid, which was totally shocking, because I wouldn't have ever guessed that I have any Indian blood or Indian relatives in me. But then as I began to wonder, what in the world happened? Was there some sort of cross-contamination going on here? What happened? I began to analyze the results and compare it to results sample results that this company offers for other racial profiles, and I began to understand what happened. That on my father's side, the people on my father's side apparently had some sort of mixture in that region of the world, and then they traveled east. And on my mother's side, I have, it seems like I have, as I began to look at all the results of the test, I began to see that apparently on my mother's side, I also had some sort of combination that makes sense, that historically came from India, and then traveled west. So it's like my father's ancestors combined, had a mixture with India, and then traveled east, and then my mother's ancestors had a mixture with people from India, and then traveled west. And neither of them, if you look at my mother or my father, neither of them look Indian at all, But oddly enough, this strange combination ended up coming together in me, and that's why I have such a common appearance of my DNA, you could say, in that part of the world. So I found it interesting that Bobby Jindal was conceived in Punjab, India, which was one of the cities in my DNA profile. So there's something going on there. It's like something from India was taken, spiritually speaking, and has a relevance in the American context. And that's why the Lord has me here. And that's why the Lord has me sharing these words with mostly people from America. Because there's something going on there. I'm still having a hard time figuring it out. As we have done on, if you have been following the tweets on Twitter, we have been doing a matching of the 12 tribes of Israel with the 12 racial groups of humanity on earth. And as I was doing the matching and asking God about it, I just kept getting that the tribe of Joseph kept matching up with India. And it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't make human sense to me. And maybe it was a bias or something. I just said, no, Lord, I just can't believe that such an important tribe, the tribe of Joseph, the one who helped rescue the Israelites from famine, could be related to India, a place of pagan worship and all these things. I just, in my natural mind, maybe like Peter with the animals, I just couldn't come to grips with that. But that's the only thing that came up. And when I just realized that that's the matching that God has, the tribe of Joseph goes with the people of India, I said, Lord, okay. And when I embraced it, the Lord showed me the evidence, and then it became obvious. But still, in my natural mind, in my spirit, I agree with that matching. But in my natural soul, my natural understanding, I still have a hard time figuring out what that all means. But I believe there's a connection there. I just can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe if God says something to you, I'd be very grateful to hear it. But just make sure it's God speaking to you and not something else, because I know that by saying all of this, I'm opening up a can of worms, and I might be hearing stuff that has nothing to do with the Spirit of God. And the thing is that the other thing about Bobby Jindal is that he was born into Hinduism. His parents were Hindu, or may still be Hindu, I'm not sure. But he converted to Christianity while he was in high school here in America. So I know that has a spiritual significance. And he is a devout Christian. He is Catholic, but despite that, which is a point against him in a sense, I can see that he believes in God, and he is a Christian, and there is this awareness of God inside of him. And one last thing that I'd like to share about Bobby Jindal before ending this video is that I found on the internet that in 1994, which means that he was around, oh boy, 24 or something. He was in his early 20s in 1994. He wrote an article entitled "The Physical Dimensions of Spiritual Warfare." And I wrote down that in that article, Jindal described the events leading up to an apparent exorcism of a friend and how he felt unable to help her at the time. However, Jindal questioned if what he saw was actually an example of spiritual warfare. And I think there's a strong connection with his Indian heritage in that, as we will share in some future tweets, the Apostle John correlates with the tribe of Levi, which in turn correlates with the people of Persia. The Persian people are very closely linked to the Indians, both geographically and spiritually. And the people of Persia, as we will share in future tweets, have a lot to do with spiritual warfare. A lot to do. I mean, there's a strong anointing. When the people of Iran convert to Christianity, you will see some powerful spiritual warriors coming out of Iran, because there's a strong spiritual warfare anointing in the people of Iran, the Iranian people, and the people who are related to that racial group around that region. And India, the western part of India, is very close to the Iranian racial group, so there's a lot of intermingling there. And Bobby Jindal has, when he becomes president, and I wish he would become president in 2012, but I don't think he's going to run, apparently. And I don't think that maybe this generation does not deserve a Bobby Jindal. Maybe that's why he is not a candidate. I don't know. But the thing is that when he becomes president, during his term in the White House, you're going to see a releasing of a mighty spiritual warfare anointing on the land of America. A spiritual warfare anointing to bring down strongholds and manifest the presence of God in a very powerful way. And that will be released upon the land when Bobby Jindal becomes President of the United States. And in the next video, we'll be talking, God willing, about Michele Bachmann.